so that if you really get interested and want to hear some more about it, we'll certainly like to see you here on November the 14th. We do have two members of the County Commission here, Commissioner Beck and Commissioner Vick. Thank you, ladies, for being here. I'm going to begin by giving you a little bit of the history of how we got to where we are. In 2010, a group of individuals began to circulate around the county with a petition, and that petition called for a referendum. And the referendum was to consider taking the county government and the City of Columbia government and combining them into a metropolitan government. In December of 2010, the Maury County Board of Elections certified to the two mayors that the petition that had been filed had met all the requirements, and therefore the two mayors had to follow the codified ordinances that the state has under 7-1-101. They had 30 days in which to select their members and to begin that process of having a charter developed. On January the 12th, Mayor Bailey invited his 10 members, and Mayor Dean Dickey invited his 5 members, and thus started our meetings. Our process was fairly standard, I think, if you're going to do something like this. We first looked at all of the different metro governments that are in existence here in the state of Tennessee. We talked to a number of their officials and read their charters, etc. We also looked at charters that various counties and cities attempted to get passed but did not pass. We talked with the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, and we also talked with a number of metro officials in other metropolitan areas that already have a metropolitan form of government. In March and April, we went to the public in 4 different meetings in which we asked them, what do you want to see in this document? And I think that was very helpful for us to hear from people who had a passion about wanting to see what their government would look like under this form. By October the 1st, just a month ago, the commission completed its first, what we'll call, final draft. We did not pass the draft, but we wanted to leave it open for discussion from these forums so that when we meet later this month, we'll be able to take your ideas back and perhaps mend them and add them or delete them based on what we hear. It is our objective to have this charter in the hands of the 3 cities, the Board of Elections, and Maury County government on December 8th. The charter itself is 22 pages long. It has a preamble, 18 articles. The nice thing, it's written in plain English, except for one 4-syllable legal word, contumacious, and we'll get into that in a minute. So hopefully you will find it easy to read and to work your way through that process. At this time, before I go into the discussions, let me introduce those from the commission that are here. I see John Hatcher, if you'd raise your hand. Doug Williamson. Oh, thank you. Tim Dodd over here. Randy Hardison up here in front. Anybody else that's here? Hopefully someone will be here in a few minutes. We're going to start this part of the session using Randy to describe what a metropolitan government is. So with Randy, I'll let you lead off with your slide presentation.
Good evening. As Bill said, I'm Randy Hardison, and I have the dubious distinction of being the only lawyer in this group of 15. And while the other 14 found this document easy to read, I would have probably drafted it differently, but I am very proud of the product we've ended up with. What when the 15 of us started on this project, as Bill said, back in January, gosh, it's been 9 months, we decided immediately among the 15 very diverse opinions that we had that we weren't going to be pro-metropolitan government, anti-metropolitan government. That really was irrelevant to the job we'd been given. Our task was to assume, if you will, that it's going to pass. It will be voted on. That's the law. And if it's can be voted on, it could pass. So our job was assume that it would, and try to draft a charter, or constitution, if you would, that designed the best form of metropolitan government that we could come up with. And that's what we attempted to do, and that's what we're here tonight to explain the charter that we have drafted and the form of metropolitan government that we came to the conclusion as a group would be best for Maury County and Columbia if that's the direction the voters sent us. After almost 9 months of research, discussion, as Bill said, we looked at many other communities. Drafting, redrafting again. We're now ready to present this, the charter to you. Again, it is still in draft form. We have an opportunity over the next 30 days to tweak it a bit, and that's one of the main reasons we're here, is to get reactions to what we've done and comments and opinions, so that if we need to do something, as we talked about at our last hearing, if we've overlooked some unintended consequences, that's what we want to hear, so that before we make our final version and present it to the county court clerk, we've had one last opportunity to try to perfect it, if you would. And once that happens, then that's what's going to be voted on. The election on this requires a majority vote of the people of Columbia, a majority vote of the people in Maury County. Even if we had 70% vote for it in the city and 30% in the county, that's not enough. It has to be more than 50% in both the city and the county. I think when Trousdale, Hartsville finally got to this point, it passed by 3 votes. That was the difference between remaining the same and becoming a metropolitan government. If this passes, and the ballot is real simple, it's going to be on the presidential primary ballot in March, and it's yes or no. Do you want metropolitan government? Yes, no. And that's it. More than 50% say yes, then we change. And if it passes, the first thing that we have provided for, and Bill will give you far more detail, my job is more of an overview. There's a transitional council created to help advise the city and county governments on this upcoming merger of the 2 governments. There'd be an election of the new metropolitan officers in November of next year, and the new government after that would take effect January of 2013. And it would all be different. So what exactly is a metropolitan government? As Bill mentioned, we had many resources available to us. This particular PowerPoint is a modification of much information that was provided to us by the University of Tennessee County Technical Advisory Service. We've tried to utilize all the information we possibly could that's out there on the pros and cons and different ways that you can do this. And there are many different ways that a metropolitan government can be formed. And that's why it's important to understand this particular charter, because they're not all the same. And the one we've created is not necessarily like Moore County or Trousdale County. They were more mergers of the cities into the counties, but they were smaller cities. Metro Nashville, it's a world in and of itself with an interesting history behind how it became what it is. And we've looked at many other counties, Moore County, Shelby County, that have done this process and took some of the things that were good and didn't take some of the parts of it that just didn't necessarily fit Maury County. We didn't necessarily have the issue of multiple cities, and Spring Hill and Mount Pleasant elected not to participate. We only had the city of Columbia and Maury County. We didn't have multiple school zones as many other places have, that you unify into one metropolitan school zone, because we've already done that. We have a unified school zone in Maury County. Our county school system will just become the metropolitan school system. And so what we've ended up with is not necessarily complicated as other areas would be. It's just the consolidation of the Maury County government and the City of Columbia government into one new government, a metropolitan government. It actually is the creation of a new political entity that takes the place of both. The city's not becoming the county and the county's not becoming the city. You have a new municipality that replaces both. So everything that's county and everything that's city ceases to exist as it used to, and it all becomes one governmental entity. And the charter that Bill will be describing in far more detail will describe how we propose that it be set up. There are three basic characteristics of a metropolitan government that we need to know about. It will divide Maury County into two parts. One is an urban services district, and the other is a general services district. And the school system would be unified, which in our case it already is. It would just be converted to a part of the metropolitan government, as it is now part of the county government. The urban services district is basically the City of Columbia. At least in the beginning, the territory of the urban services district is the city limits of the City of Columbia. That area will continue to get the same services that it gets now: police, fire, garbage, etc. Its taxes, the taxes for the urban services area would be very similar to the city taxes we now pay. And it would, there would be separate budgets for the general services area and the urban services area. So to some extent, it's, the urban services area is what we now know as City of Columbia. It's just now part of one big government instead of two smaller governments. The general services area is Maury County, including City of Columbia and Mount Pleasant, to the extent that it receives county services, what formerly were known as county services, and same thing with Spring Hill. The services in that area will remain similar, as will the taxation for it. It's just now all pulled together in one metropolitan government, and you'll have a tax bill that one tax bill, your metropolitan tax, which will have the breakdown of urban, general, and it'll show how much of all of that's going to the school board and to different places. I don't know whether you've... Chattanooga has even though they opted out of going metro, they've become de facto metro, and if you see the Hamilton County tax bill, it's about this long, and it has a breakdown of every dollar that you pay, where does it go and what's it for, and with the singular government, metropolitan government, it's easier to do that, and it's part of our charter that it would be done that way. The powers of a metropolitan government are, it's a combination of everything that Maury County used to be able to do, everything that the City of Columbia used to be able to do is now rolled up into one metropolitan government. And I don't believe our charter necessarily creates more, creates less, but it all is administered through one governmental entity. Instead of having multiple mayors and multiple councils and multiple commissions and multiple zoning departments and multiple accounting departments and multiple engineering departments, et cetera, you have one. You have one. And it functions under the metropolitan government. Just a couple of features that I've pointed out, and again, Bill will go over in more detail, that we did choose to retain what's known as the constitutional officers. That's been handled a number of different ways. We studied this at length. They could become basically department heads, but after looking at the history, we did decide to retain what's known as the constitutional officers as part of the new metropolitan government, meaning the sheriff, the county court clerk, which would become the metropolitan court clerk, the trustees, Steve Kahn's office, Jim Dooley's assessor's office, John Fleming's register of deeds. They would continue to be elected department heads. We just felt like the history and the custom of our ability to elect these people was the preference, and we decided to keep that. They are now, though, instead of part of the county government, now part of one metropolitan government. We did convert at least one formally elected office and official to a department head. Didn't abolish the position, we just incorporated it into a new department of public works, and that's the road superintendent, which has historically been elected. Now under this metropolitan government would be hired by the metropolitan government and would be part of the Department of Public Works. So instead of having a county road department and a city street department, we'll have one Department of Public Works, which you can consolidate all of their resources, and they'll be responsible for streets, roads, services, infrastructure. We've also decided to have an executive mayor. Rather than having a mayor that, for example, the City of Columbia has a mayor who basically is another council person, as well as the vice mayor. They vote just like all the others do. If you're going to have one consolidated or singular government, we decided it was probably better to follow the pattern that state and federal governments have followed throughout our history, whereas you have a delineation between the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. And that's what we've done, and we have at the head of the executive department that runs the day-to-day operations of metropolitan government, it's the metropolitan mayor. The other piece of that's the legislative branch, separate from the metropolitan mayor. Mayor's not a voting member, participant of the legislative branch, the Metropolitan Council. And that's the actual legislative body We have another official with us, the esteemed Judge Lovell, who was actually very instrumental with his advice when it related to the judicial branch. Thank you very much. And Bill will discuss the numbers of people, et cetera, but we have a legislative branch, the Metropolitan Council, that will decide all the affairs of this metropolitan government, urban general services area for the whole county. And just a little tidbit for food, as food for thought, an example of how having a singular metropolitan government might be different from what we're doing now. One of the larger issues that we have at the County Commission is the need for a justice center. You know, we have a courthouse that houses way more traffic than it was ever designed and is not in the greatest of conditions. But, you know, where are you going to get the money to build a $20, $25 million justice center for us lawyers to use? Under a metropolitan or a consolidated government, you have options. Remember, all of the county property becomes metropolitan property. All of the city property becomes metropolitan property. You don't necessarily need to have a city hall on top of everything else. You might take the existing city hall and convert it to a justice center and save us about $20 million. Those are some things that can be considered. Whether that would work or not, I don't know. But it's an example of how a consolidation of our governments gives us a different way of doing things, and it gives us different options. In conclusion, and I'm going to turn it back over to Bill to give you the meat, March the 6th, 2012, as I said, on the presidential primary ballot, it's going to be one simple little sentence. Do you want metropolitan government or not? Yes or no? And it will change how we do things in perhaps the history of Maury County. And I'm very proud of the group that I've worked with, because I do think, back to remembering what we decided in the beginning, we assumed that it would pass. And that if it did, we wanted to try to have the best charter for Columbia and Maury County that we could have possibly come up with. I'm not saying that we're necessarily pro or against, but I do feel in my heart that if it passes, we have, as a group, that have dedicated much time, and I'm very proud to have served with them, I think a heck of a charter. We may still have some issues. That's why we're here talking to you before we finalize it. So please, let us know what you think.
Okay, Randy, you left me with your one slide. How do I get to the next one?
Oh, I was supposed to do that. Here.
Go ahead and put it on, and I'll work from there.
As soon as I find Mr. Mouse.
Okay, very good. One of the key things that we found when we had our was the concern of voters not having the opportunity to have a real say-so in their form of government. What you're going to hear tonight puts all of that power right into your voting hands. This is what I would call a very strong mayor form of government, for which you are electing he or she. You're going to, instead of having 22 commissioners, you're going to have 11. Again, it's going to be up to you to make sure that we put the right people in that will do the job and do it well. There's some other things that you're going to hear me talk about that, again, you're in the driver's seat It's not the other way around where the elected official is necessarily in the driver's seat. What I'm going to do is highlight some key things in this 22-page document. You all have copies. After I get through, then we're going to have a series of questions and answers. And we will take back the comments that you have, as Randy and I have said earlier, and try to meld this into a document that when you go into the voting booth, you will have had hopefully the best information possible to give you a chance to look at that form of government. We start our charter off with a preamble, and I give John Hatcher a kudos for doing that, and I want to read, because it's important for you to read that. We, the people of Maury County, Tennessee, in order to form a more efficient and effective government, to provide the tools for maximum economic growth and prosperity, to attain highest quality of life, and to secure the brightest possible future for ourselves and for our descendants, do hereby combine and unite the governments of Maury County and the City of Columbia to establish and adopt this charter to form a Metropolitan Government of Columbia and Maury County, Tennessee. Let's talk about the Metro Council. The council will have one member elected from each district. The candidate from each district receiving the largest number of votes is elected. The initial boundaries and district numbers of the Metropolitan Council districts are the same as those for the election of county commissioners of the Maury County in existence at the effective date of this charter. Each member of the charter, or each member of the Metropolitan Council, serves for 4 years. The qualifying requirements are that the individual must be a resident as defined by state law and the district from which he or she seeks election, must be at least 21 years of age, must have been a resident of the area of metropolitan government in the district from which he or she seeks election for at least 1 year from the date of the election. When council members move out of the district he or she represents, a vacancy is created. Council members will initially be paid based upon population classification in accordance with state law. The council by ordinance may modify the pay for its members, but no alteration in pay may take effect for any council member until the next term. Commission members or council members must be in attendance to receive their pay. The vice mayor, at the first meeting after each election, the council must elect one of its members to be vice mayor, and he or she serves for 2 years. At the end of that term, he or she may run again. If elected, then we're off with the same situation. Vice mayor may vote on all matters as a regular member of council, and the vice mayor receives the same pay as the other council members. Majority of authorized members of the council constitutes a quorum to transact business. I think that's pretty common in most of our situations. The Metropolitan Council must hold at least 2 regular meetings each calendar month. Special meetings of the council may be held when called by the Metro Mayor, and then there's several other ways in which a special meeting can be called. An ordinance must generally be approved by 2 separate considerations at regular meetings to become effective. The council may adopt a resolution after a single consideration at any meeting. If the mayor vetoes an ordinance or resolution, the veto may be overridden by a vote of 2/3 of the authorized membership of council. Finally, vacancies. Vacancies on the council may be filled by a majority of the remaining council members present and voting. Article 3, and I'm not going to read all of the duties and responsibilities, but I would point out that number 1, number 3, number 8, and numbers 12 and 13 may be delegated to the assistant to the mayor, and we're going to talk about that. But when you read these, you will see that whoever is your mayor is truly in the driver's seat, and he's there because, or she, because you have put them there. The mayor, as I said, may delegate that supervisory responsibilities to those that I've just mentioned to the assistant. To qualify for the candidate for metropolitan mayor, an individual must be at least 25 years of age, must have resided in the area of the metropolitan government for at least 3 consecutive years immediately before the deadline for filing as candidate. The mayor may serve only 3 consecutive 4-year terms, but may qualify and be elected again after an intervening period. The Metropolitan Council sets and modifies the salary of the mayor, but the salary may not be less than that established by general law for a county mayor of the same population class as the metropolitan government. The mayor may approve any ordinance adopted by council by signing it or by vetoing it. The mayor, if the mayor signs the ordinance, it becomes effective according to its terms. If the mayor does not sign or veto the ordinance within 10 days after it passes on final consideration, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and federal holidays, the ordinance becomes effective according to terms. Key one is the next one. If the mayor does veto it, then he must get that back to the council within the next meeting with a reason stating why, and in order for that to veto to be overruled, 2/3 of the authorized membership must vote accordingly. Article 4 talks about the executive departments and boards, and you heard me a minute ago talk about the assistant to the mayor. When you read that definition, you will see that it parallels a lot of what a city manager would do, a county manager would do, a city administrator would do. But again, it puts all of that responsibility on the mayor for he or she to find that right person. What we did not want to see is the mayor hiring maybe their campaign manager that might not have any experience whatsoever. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar business. And I think if you get someone in there who has these qualifications, and by which Metro may add to these requirements, you in fact have a little bit of a hybrid. And the other important point was that the assistant to the mayor serves at the will of the mayor and carries out the duties delegated by the mayor. The Metropolitan Council may create, consolidate, or abolish departments, boards, commissions, or other agencies of the metropolitan government. And I would move on past that to E rather. And that's an important one. Rather than having or maintaining a department, division of a department, or a department function as provided by the next section, the Metropolitan Council may contract for providing of the services of the department, division of a department, or any function of a department. And so what we've done is we have given this government the tools to look at not only expanding the existing departments, but also to be using a third party if that is appropriate. Quick run through the departments. We got the Department of Finance, Department of Human Resources, the Department of Internal Audit, and one of the things we've added in that internal audit is that that department once a year will present to the Metro Mayor and Council a list of recommendations to reduce costs and improve efficiencies. You've got the Department of Recreation, the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Codes, Department of Public Safety, Department of Public Works, Department of Information Systems, Department of Tourism, Department of Veteran Services, Department of Historical Archives. The library simply changes its name and continues to function accordingly. Power and Water, let me go back, I jumped over that. The Power and Water is a little bit different in that we do have a county water system. And what we're suggesting is that initially we start this metro government with those 2 independent utilities doing what they're doing. But somewhere down the road, in 3 years or so, they would look at consolidation. And for those people who are employees here, let me say that what would happen in that situation is that the employees would keep all of their same fringe benefits, whether you're a county employee or a city employee, but the Metro Council ought to, recognizing that fringe benefits are a huge cost to government, whether you're a city manager form of government, a county form of government. We have put in here the ability for that Metro Council to establish a new pay scale and fringe benefit packages for all new employees. And we'll get into that in a little more detail in a minute. Election Commission basically remains the same. The last one is the Metropolitan Attorney. The mayor, with confirmation of majority of the Metropolitan Council present and voting, must appoint an attorney or attorneys to handle the legal work of the Metropolitan Government. Randy covered pretty much what Article 5 is, and I won't bore you with it, but it does state one of the things that Randy didn't mention, and that is what we call a special service district. And I'm going to use, because I was in this community and I was very impressed with their fire facilities in Culleoka, that let's just say that the residents in Culleoka want to go to a 24/7 fire service. That can in fact be calculated into costs, and the people that make up Culleoka would have that opportunity to vote to do that. That would create a special tax district for that particular type service. Article 6 talks about the Urban Council. It will constitute 3 members of the Urban Council whose sole function is mandatory obligation to levy an ad valorem tax adequate with other available funds to do the work that needs to be done. The term of that office is for 2 years. Those 3 members are determined by the highest vote getters of those people living in the urban service district. Article 7 deals with the budget, and thank God we had Tim Todd on this thing, because it was complicated, and I appreciate everything you did on that, Tim. But the fiscal year for the Metropolitan Government begins July 1st, ends on June 30th. It breaks the budget down, as Randy's indicated, into readable portions. You have a portion that deals with the general service district. You have another portion that deals with the urban service district, and if there is any special service districts, you would have that. In no event may the total proposed expenditures from any fund exceed the total anticipated revenues plus the estimated unappropriated surplus or fund balance plus applicable reserves, but less any estimated deficit at the end of the current fiscal year. For reserve purposes, all monies in reserve savings of the City of Columbia immediately before the effective date of this charter will become reserves in the urban service district, and all monies in reserve savings in the Maury County immediately before the effective date of this charter will become the reserve for the general service district. The mayor must review the operating budget that will be submitted by the Director of Finance, and by no later than May 1st, the mayor must submit his or her budget to the Metropolitan Council. It should include not only the numbers, but also an explanation of what is going to be happening in this particular budget that we will have. The council must finally adopt an operating budget for the ensuing fiscal year no later than June 30th. We all have had experience in this county of where the school system and the county commission have been at each other, and as a result we have never been able to it's been very difficult to get a budget passed and in place by July 1st. What the charter says is that if those two bodies are not able to come together, then the mayor's budget is approved until such time as the Metro Council and the school board can come to resolutions. Section 7.09, immediately following the budget, the council must levy an annual tax on real and personal property in the general service district. It will be broken down, as Randy's indicated, for the school as well as for general services, etc. There's a capital improvements budget, and again, as we've said, it's broken out so that everyone will know, based on where they live in the general services district, urban service district, or the special services district, what that capital budget is for that particular year. No government can operate without a debt. And in this case, the urban services district will be responsible for the debt issued for the benefit of the urban service district. The general service district will be responsible for the debt issued for the benefit of the general services district, and each special services district will be responsible for debt issued for the benefit of that district. In terms of the article on education, the cost of public education is assigned to the general services district. The school board is composed of one member elected from each council district. The candidate receiving the largest number of votes is elected. The mission for the school or education system shall, in accordance with state law, do all necessary and proper things to operate an efficient and accredited school system that is in compliance with state and federal standards. Qualifications for a school board member. Each candidate of the school board membership must be qualified to vote, must be at least 21 years of age, and must have been a resident of Maury County for at least 1 year before the deadline of filing as a candidate. There will be staggered 4-year terms, and after the initial election, all terms will be 4 years, and the compensation will be equal to that of the Metro Council. Tenure and benefit rights for teacher and other employees of the school system are retained. Randy talked about the constitutional officers. I'm not going to go through that other than to say that when we get to the sheriff, that was probably the $64 question for us to resolve, was who was going to be the chief law enforcement officer. And I can assure you from my chair, that was a great deal of deliberation. At the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that the public was saying to us, we want to be able to control who is operating our government. Well, the sheriff is the person whom each of us go to the polls and vote on, and so therefore it was felt that the sheriff ought to be the chief law enforcement officer along with the other duties that he has. When we get to the Metropolitan Judiciary System, the General Sessions Court of Maury County is continued as the Metropolitan General Sessions Court. Everything basically remains the same with the exception of the city judge and the city court clerk. In those two instances, these individuals would continue to serve out their term. The judges would then make a decision at that point as to whether or not that administrative judge position needs to be kept, and they would so direct that recommendation to the Metro Council for consideration. Otherwise, the 3 judges will assume that responsibility, and Randy and I and Ashley Brown met with the judges, and the judges indicated, based on the information they had, they felt like they could do the job that currently the city judge is handling. Except as provided in this article, existing judgeships and other judicial positions serving the area of the Metropolitan Government, including those of the criminal court clerk, clerk and master, and judicial commissioners are continuing and will continue to operate as provided under existing law, subject to future amendment. Article 12 deals with ethics, and while the City of Columbia has I think, a fairly decent ethics policy, I know that there's been a lot of concern about having something for the county to look at. And so we spent a great deal of time looking at this ethics policy. It's still somewhat in rough shape, but at least it will give you a feel as to where this Charter Commission is going. Holding other positions. No member of any board, commission, or authority, or any employee of the Metropolitan Government may hold any other remunerative office or position in the Metropolitan Government. No elected or appointed official of any local government outside the Metropolitan Government may hold any elected or appointed office in the Metropolitan Government except with the approval of the Metropolitan Council, soliciting for campaigns. Now this one I think is in both of our governments currently. No employee of the Metropolitan Government may solicit funds or assistance for a political campaign for any Metropolitan Government office while on Metropolitan Government property or while on duty. This section does not supersede any other law. Firm doing business with government. A member of the Metropolitan Council, the Metropolitan Mayor, the Metropolitan School Board member, or other Metropolitan Government official who is employed by a firm that enters into a contract with the Metropolitan Government may not continue employment with the firm while the firm is doing business with the Metropolitan Government. Employees may not hold elective office. I know this is true in the City of Columbia. I'm not sure about with the county right now. No Metropolitan employee, including general government employees and employees of boards, commissions, and authorities, may hold an elected position within the Metropolitan Government. Both of us, I think, have a nepotism policy, and I will let you read that at your leisure. Our four-syllable word, contumacious, neglect of duty. Our attorney told us that that word in particular needed to be in there because if they have to prosecute against a elected member of the council or the mayor, that word apparently is appropriate. And what it basically means is you have somebody who is really being more than obnoxious. But anyway, that's your 25-cent four-syllable word that you need to deal with. One of the things that I think that is important for us, especially for the employees, is pension and retirement systems. And while I said a few minutes ago, as far as the school system, tenure and so forth, that's taken care of. One of the things that we suggested, and we use the word may, and that is establish a new retirement and pension system. But it goes on to say all benefits payable to members, retired members, and their survivors in accordance with any of the retirement plans of the former City of Columbia or Maury County as the plans existed before the effective date of this charter will continue unimpaired for the same duration provided in those plans as they existed before the effective date, and those benefits are an obligation and liability of the Metropolitan Government. 13.02, existing employee pension retirement systems of the City of Columbia and Maury County, if any, on the effective date of this charter are recognized and continued. And the 13.03 does create a civil service board, which I believe both governments currently have. Economic development, and this is interesting because in a number of the charters we looked at, no one talked about economic development. And we sat down with Maury Alliance and together with their legal people and Randy and a few others, we crafted this particular article in which it takes the mayor, the Metro Council, the Industrial Development Board, Maury Alliance, and the Columbia Housing and Redevelopment Corporation. Those become the key factors in guiding this county in terms of economic development. The real key in this article is the following, 14.05. The Economic Development Agency, in conjunction with the mayor and in consultation with the Industrial Development Board, must prepare and present to the Metropolitan Council on March 1st of each year a proposed 4-year economic development plan for the metropolitan government. The plan must include action to be taken by the metropolitan government itself, as well as actions to be taken in cooperation with other public and private organizations to enhance the prosperity and well-being of the metropolitan government's residents and communities. To become effective, the plan must be approved by resolution of the council. The council may amend the plan. The plan as presented or as amended must be approved within 60 days of the plan's presentation to council. Article 15 talks about a whole litany of other organizations that are out there. And let me just comment on this or read this, and then I want to make some other comments. Any authority, agency, board, commission, or committee existing either independently or under the City of Columbia or Maury County is recognized and continues as an agency of the metropolitan government. It will have the same relationship with the metropolitan government as it previously had to the City of Columbia or Maury County. The names of each such entity is modified to indicate this relationship to the metropolitan government. Now, there are two groups that there will be some change to, and that is your planning commission and to your codes and zoning. Those two groups will have to have a different constitution of members, but that's not something that I see as a real issue. At our first meeting, there was a suggestion that perhaps we ought to make some reference to the Maury County Regional Hospital, and I think we will probably add that in there so that everybody understands where the Maury County Hospital situation is. Again, getting back to you as voters, there are 3 ways in which you can amend this charter. The first one is through the Metro Council. The second is through the typical petition process that brought us to where we are today. And the third one is to have a charter revision commission make a study and make a recommendation. On the first one, where we're going by ordinance, any amendment to this charter may be proposed by ordinance adopted by a 2/3 vote of the authorized membership of council on 3 separate considerations at consecutive regular meetings. The referendum on the proposal as an election item on the question under state law is the way it will be presented. The petition is a little bit different, and you will notice that the requirement is a little bit higher than what is currently out there. The petition must be signed by a number of voters equaling 25% of those who voted in the preceding countywide election. And we had some discussion on that at our first forum, and we hope to hear some comments from you on that as well. Transition. If this passes on March 6th, the very next day you don't have a metropolitan government. There is this transition process that we go through, and we've outlined that for you, and I want to get to some questions rather than continue to recite this. But if you read this, you will see that there are some graduated steps that you go through so that you are able to move efficiently, competently into that form of government, and hopefully all of the right processes will be followed to make that work. This concludes my oral presentation. It's been fairly fast, but what I'd like to now do, we have two people who've got microphones. If you will raise your hand, what we will do is recognize you, let you ask the question, and if I can't answer it, I've got Doug over there, Tim, Randy, Stephen, and some others that might be able to help us. So we'll take the first question.
My name is Jim Jones. I noticed on page 2, the members of the council, one from each district elected, and it says if a person moves out of the district, then it's vacated.
Correct.
But it doesn't address how we fill that vacancy. For instance, if a person gets injured or killed in a car wreck, incapacitated, how would it be filled?
If you'll look later on in that, I believe it's in that article, where there isn't a vacancy created, then the Metro Council can begin that process. And I assume the process would be for the Metro Council to go back and look at those who ran in that particular race for that council district and make a determination as to who would fill that position. Am I correct on that, Randy?
Yeah, the council decides. I believe it's the last section in that article.
2.08.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Barry Brown. Is there any pro here? I don't know why we're going through this. You know, why did they start it or anything? I haven't talked to anybody that's for it
Well,
that I know of, and I cannot see why we discard the
Okay.
government and start all over again.
okay, that's a good question. Let me talk a little bit personally, and then we'll get right to the point that you've raised. When I came here in 1988, I hadn't been here but probably 6 or 9 months when someone said I needed to read the 2020 plan. And that thus began the process of periodically people coming up and saying, we need a metropolitan form of government. What happened was, as I said, in 2010, a group of individuals went out and asked for signatures. When you look at governments, we are a creature of the state. In other words, we just can't, this group together, decide we're going to become a city. There is a process that you have to go through. And what happened was that the petitioners were successful in getting enough voters, registered voters in Maury County to sign that petition. The petitions were then turned over to the Maury County Board of Elections. They went through and saw if Bill Gettner signed it and is that the same name that's on the records, etc. Once they reached that figure of 10%, then the board certifies to the two mayors that this petition is a legitimate petition and you must, I can't emphasize the word must heavily enough, you must form a charter commission, and this commission will then do basically what we've done for the last 9 months, is prepare a charter and then present it to you for your consideration on March 6, 2012 for a yes or no vote.
That, I know the legal stuff, what you have to go through. But as far as I'm concerned, I like the existing government.
Sure.
We have 22 commissioners, which everybody is represented by. You're going to cut it down to 11, which is more of a power block. You're going to have, and most of that power block is going to be in Columbia, percentage-wise population. Leaves the rest of us out in the county sort of hanging in the wind. You're talking about 2 districts, an urban district and a general district. So if the money comes in and it goes into the general district, well, that power block can vote it to wherever they want to, right?
No. The money that comes in from the general service district can only be used in the general service district. The money that comes in from all sources for the urban service district can only be used in that urban service district. You can't take money and put it over into another district. Maybe I didn't understand your question.
But I'm talking about, don't we, in any government, get so much money from the federal government?
Mhm.
Return taxes, right?
Mhm.
The state gives so much money back to the counties, correct?
Mhm.
Where does this money go to?
It'll be broken down based on the, when money does come to us through various federal governments, portions go to the county and portions go to the city. It's just like on our normal taxes that the state gives back to us.
Right now, it's broken down by county and by city.
Right.
But
And
if
that's
we can-
exactly what will happen again.
Oh, so there's no general fund that's delivered back to the county, countywide, huh?
No, I mean, it's, the money that the county operates will be based on the ad valorem taxes that are assigned to it and whatever other revenue sources that are in the general service area. All of that money goes for there. Also, I thought maybe you were going to go to the debt side. The same thing happens on the debt. If you build a bridge in the general service district, those who live in that general service district are going to pay for that new bridge. The folks in the urban service district will not. Reverse the role. The city wants to build a bridge. Then the money and the debt will be handled through the through the urban service district. And so that way you're able to distinguish how your monies are being spent. The neat thing is you'll now be able to tell how much money that you pay in property taxes is going to the school system and how much is going to general government. I really don't know what my county taxes are, but at least I'll now know that X amount is going to the school system and Y amount is going to the general government services. And again, when you look at the finance side that Tim Dodd and others worked on, we wanted to make that document very clear to you as the taxpayer where your money was going, how it was going to be spent, and thus give you the assurance that you know where all the dollars are going. Right now, I'm not sure if too many of us know where all of our money is going, but at least through this budget process, you'll have a little bit better handle on where your money is going.
So in no way can this metropolitan government vote on a, like this Titan Stadium, where everybody in the metropolitan area is on hook for it, no matter where you live. So that's not going to happen. If they build a stadium and they build it in the urban, in Columbia, it's strictly going to be Columbia, right?
Right.
Nope. And the general service will not be involved, correct?
Randy, am I correct in saying that? That is correct? There may
Yes,
be
there is a separate section
the sports authority, yeah.
for sports authorities that
You know,
gives Metropolitan Authority. We did not incorporate that into this charter. There is a sports authority provision under the enabling statutes for metropolitan governments.
right.
We did not incorporate that to avoid the problem that you're concerned about.
So, but, you know, it's like this new building, what is it, convention center? So that'll be strictly urban. If Columbia wants to build a convention center, it will be financed through Columbia bonds.
Not necessarily. It depends on what it's going to serve. You know, is the convention center just for Columbia? Is it for the whole area?
Well, see, that's what they're arguing in Davidson County right now, is that convention center is going to serve everybody. But in Brentwood, a couple other communities, Bellevue, they said they don't get any service at all.
The nice thing is that it's decided by elected officials, and we haven't changed that.
Could we put into this charter that anything over, say, $30 million has to be voted on?
We've never thought about that. No one's really ever suggested that.
That way it'll give more control, you're talking about.
Sure. You know, you look at the Justice Center, and, you know, the consideration that's been given, and that's a $25 million. It's been debated and debated and debated in the community.
Yeah.
And I think it's the electoral process that gives us the control. It doesn't matter whether it's 11 Metropolitan Council people or 7 City Council people or 22 county commissioners. You've got an expenditure of that magnitude, and you and I and everybody all of a sudden is going to voice our opinion as to whether we think we should be spending $25 million on a Justice Center, and who's going to pay for it, where the money's going to come from, or whether we're going to build a Titans Park or an NBA facility. And I guess we've just not been suggested to put some kind of a dollar figure in. Knowing human nature, if our government, starts talking about spending that kind of money, it's going to be debated all over town, and then some. So do we necessarily need to do that? I don't know. It's a suggestion.
I've always, you know, I'm not against big government or government doing things, but I see like the convention center, which I'm not a big fan of, or the rail line from Nashville to Lebanon. The taxpayers in Nashville are still supporting, for every person that rides that thing, they're paying $200 for every ride. Or something like that. I'm not sure exactly.
I know.
Is there any way we could, like, say, put a dollar figure, like $50 million, that
You know, I'm not happy with everything that the state government does in terms of expenditures, or especially the federal government does in terms of expenditures. It ultimately, it's this, and this is not really a metropolitan question versus a city county government. It ultimately gets back to who we elect to this thing and how responsible they are, how accountable to us they are in terms of spending money. You know, I get asked the question all the time, will this save money? Well, it could, it should. Will it? I don't know. Who are we going to elect to it, and how good a job are they going to do? You know, and the same thing's true if it comes to all of a sudden, you know, the people we've elected decide they want to, you know, build a 200,000 square foot, you know, convention center in Columbia. Do we really need that? But I think that kind of expenditure is going to end up being debated pretty heavily anyway. And that's, you know, for every Metropolitan Council meeting is going to be open to the public to yell and scream and shout and throw things. And that's, I guess that's our checks and balances ultimately, is that it's democratic, and we can always re-elect, unelect, toss people who do things that we don't necessarily want. Yeah, I don't know that it's anything different with the metro versus the other. It's still out there.
I was born and raised in Eastern Kentucky, which is politics is a little bit nasty. In one county, the mayor and every commissioner in that county elected to open up a dump. They each got 25 or 30 grand apiece. They knew they weren't going to be elected, but they sold that county out, and it took 4 years to stop it. By then, the dump was already a thing, and they were bringing it into this place. Now, I'm not saying that you know, this could happen here, but I'd like to see some limit on the elected officials.
Okay.
All elected officials are not going to, you know, we can sit here and argue and stuff like that.
Yeah, oh, I know.
And let's put a limit if this comes into it.
We, thanks to Stephen Worley's immaculate notes, we already have a list of suggestions and comments from the first meeting. He's taking copious notes again of this meeting. And I think I mentioned earlier, we've still got some fine tuning to do. And a lot of what's in here now was based on comments and conversations, and I think, and Tim, this is sort of falls under your area, whether we need to look at some safeguards, or, you know, I don't know what you would do, maybe anything of a certain size, a debt issue of a certain size goes to referendum. And I've seen that in some areas, that if you're going to have build a Titan stadium, great, but it's got to go to referendum.
Go ahead, Mike, you've got the...
Okay, my name is Mike Anderson. I'm a lifelong resident of Maury County. Been fortunately to be involved in government over 30 years, so I've seen some good and some bad. But I do have some comments and observations. I have several of them. I'll list the first one, and then I don't want to monopolize it. I want to go around to other people, but Section 403 in your departments that you're setting up, in observing it, all of your departments have bachelor degrees required except the Veteran Services and the Historical Archives. Also, in looking at that, something that seemed very unusual to me is that in addition to the bachelor's degrees required, in the Department of Public Works, you're requiring a civil engineering degree instead of just an engineering degree, and they must be a licensed engineer. As people that practice engineering know, that you can only operate in the discipline of which you are trained in, and this department covers so many disciplines that I think that's really inappropriate to have that requirement in Public Works Department when your Department of Engineering doesn't even have a requirement for a licensed engineer.
So what would you suggest we put in here, Mike?
I would suggest that you leave it as a bachelor's degree in engineering,
Okay.
or equivalent like the other statements in the other departments. If there is going to be a licensed engineer who cannot have all the disciplines that will be required by Metro government, that it would be in the Department of Engineering if you are going to have one. However, to have some belief that one licensed engineer is going to have the multiple disciplines required is just pie in the sky. It ain't going to happen.
Appreciate that. We'll work on that one. There was somebody, let's get the gentleman way in the back. You were here first, or right after the two ladies came in, so.
My name's Eric Marshall. I have a question about this, about the citing of taxes. All right. Thing is that I don't see anywhere about the General Services District where we have any representation at all. I've read this whole thing twice. Talks about the Urban Council. Doesn't say anything about us who live out in the county. We are not being represented.
Yes, you are.
Why is that?
Yeah. If you, let me, that is under,
Thing it does talk about, it says that after such and such meeting, says that the urban council shall meet and talk about everything that was said during the meeting and pass tax rates and stuff like that.
but that's only for the urban or for the general urban service
It
district.
says right here about general services district.
Yeah, the Metropolitan Council decides the tax rate for both the general services area and the urban services area. You have an urban council, without going into great detail about why you have to have an enabling body, but that three-person group, who are three council people of the 11. Do not make that decision. The Metropolitan Council decides the tax rate for both areas, and this is required by law. The Urban Council must adopt what the Metropolitan Council sends to them.
Right,
They have
right.
no discretion, no authority. So you're saying that, well, the urban area has this body that represents them. Well, no. It's the Metropolitan Council that represents everyone. And that's the core of a metropolitan government.
That's not what it says here, though, sir. You're talking about taxes and raising people, and then also it talks, the first blurb was talking about you cannot tax people using the urban rates onto general district onto the urban. But then later on down in the document, it also says that to levy taxes. Basically, it gives the county council or the metropolitan council, however you wish to term it, gives them the wide open door to redo everybody's taxes.
No, the Metropolitan Council will decide all of the tax rates.
Right, I understand that, but it gives them a
The
wide open door.
the
to bring it
urban
up.
services tax rate has to be promulgated by the Urban Council, but they don't have any discretion. All they do is do what the Metropolitan Council just tells them.
Then who would come up with the tax rates? for
The
everybody?
11 members of the Metropolitan Council.
All right, are people out in the General Services District, are there people representing us on that council?
Yes.
Specifically representing our
Yes.
areas?
Yeah, the 11 is based on population distribution, redistricting, one man, one vote, everything that makes it legal. That's why we followed the current 11 judicial districts, so there'd be an equal distribution of people on the council between rural and non-rural.
Well, let's see, it still looks like a lot of, like taxation without representation, which is what this country was founded on.
Okay?
Bill Sampson. I'm sorry.
More succinctly. And I think I understand the confusion about the
Stephen,
representation.
would
I'm
you
sorry.
introduce yourself?
I'm Steve Worley. I'm on the, I was on the charter commission that wrote this thing. The Metro Council will be elected in districts, in fact, initially will be exactly the same districts as the county commission. There will be equal representation for each person in the entire county, whether you're in the Urban Services District, the city of Spring Hill, the city of Mount Pleasant, or no city at all. So there's no extra representation for the Urban Services District or for any city. So as far as the tax rates for the entire General Services District will be set by a council in which every person in the General Services District, whether or not you're in the Urban Services District too, has equal representation. Did that clarify anything? I hope. In other words, it's essentially like the county commission setting the tax rates for both General Services District and Urban Services District.
Right. Okay, Bill?
I'm Bill Sampson. I just have a comment about, just a clarification on, in section 203, where we're talking about council appointing a vice mayor versus having then an elected mayor with an assistant to the mayor. My suggestion would be that maybe the nomenclature would be, maybe the chairman, they would elect a chairman or a president of the council versus a mayor. Just kind of a little thing that I thought
And
just.
Bill comment. We actually debated the title of that position a good bit. Matter of fact, I think I was one of the ones who wanted to go chairman, and then others wanted to go vice chairman. Or vice mayor. But we would definitely take a look at it again.
Bill, we will take your comment back to the other members, and we'll rediscuss that and hopefully come to a satisfactory conclusion, but I appreciate that comment.
And I had one more comment.
Sure, Bill.
Initially, I thought that Mount Pleasant was going to be, Spring Hill wouldn't be because of the two different counties, but that Mount Pleasant would also be included in the metro plan. Did they elect not to do it, or?
Well, we approached the two cities that you've mentioned in January and discussed with them what was potentially going to happen. And we encouraged them to give consideration to being an amendment to this process. For reasons that you will need to ask those mayors, they elected not to do it. Now, what's going to happen? And that's, I'm glad you brought that point up because that's very important. If the voters approve this on March 6th, the existing corporate limits of both Mount Pleasant and Spring Hill are frozen in place for eternity. I think that the commission felt that that was a little unfair to do that. And so what we will pass as a resolution at our last meeting, which will state that because all cities in Tennessee, and there's roughly 453 cities, every one of those cities has to submit under Section 1101 a 10-year growth plan. And what we're going to recommend in that resolution is that if the county goes metropolitan and Mount Pleasant and Spring Hill do not want to come part of it, fine, then that we would be asking State Representative Butt and Senator Ketron to sponsor legislation, either private or make it general in nature, that would allow for the new Metro Council to recognize their 10-year growth plan areas. And as I said to one of the reporters, we're all joined at the hip. And they need to prosper just as we need to be able to prosper. And I think if we give them that additional 10-year growth area, they will have that opportunity to grow and be prosperous. And eventually, we're all successful. But to shut them down now to the corporate limits they're at now, I think is really unfair. But we will approach it on that basis. But as of today, neither city has asked to be a part of this process. And basically, they will have up until the 1st of December to make that decision. I'll be in communications with them a little later on this week to let them know that they do need to come to some resolution. And whatever decision they come to, we'll certainly abide to it. But if they don't do anything, we're still going to pass that resolution. And then if it does pass, then hopefully our legislators will give them that opportunity to go to their 10-year growth plan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
I've got one more quick
okay,
one.
go ahead.
Okay? And then I'll sit down. Is there a reason by law that the school board, since we elect those representatives, can't be a separate entity? In other words, control their own budget versus be included with the council, since they are elected and we do elect them?
State law controls that. We had actually a good bit of discussion about the possibility of severing those two budgets and incorporating a referendum, and there are a couple of communities that have that by private act, but state law basically mandates what we're doing. So short of changing state law, which we don't have the authority to do, just like with the city limits issue, we had to deal within the confines of the state law. But we actually had a good bit of debate on what we could and could not do, and had specialized legal counsel answer that question for us.
That always seems like a power struggle every year.
I know.
Next question. Yes, ma'am. Tim, right here, front row.
Yes, sir. I'm Patsy Mosley, and in section 1302, addressing the existing pensions and retirement systems, It addresses the city of Columbia and Maury County. It does not address Columbia Power and Water and the Maury County Water.
You're absolutely right, Patsy, it doesn't. I had a conversation the other day with the head of Columbia Power and Water. And one of the things that I suggested to him was, give me your ideas of what you want to incorporate in there. As a minimum, I would like to suggest to our commission that we add some language that says that the fringe benefits for those two groups are to be maintained for all existing employees. Any new employees, there may be another pension system, but for all those who are currently there, since we've already done it in the other part, that may be something that we need to add, especially for that situation where we are consolidating.
Thank you.
Me again. Section 206, I have something I need a clarification on. Is the mayor considered a member of the council?
No.
No.
Okay. That being said, jump to 302. I have a little bit of a problem with making the mayor so different than any other government employee or elected official. It says on here at the last sentence in that paragraph, the mayor's salary may not be increased except for increases based upon increases in the CPI nor diminished during a term. The conditions on other members of the council are that any raises will not take effect until the next term, whoever that may be. I have a problem with this. To me, it kind of makes a career politician, and that's usually where we go bad. I think it would be more appropriate as just a comment that this may be something that it could be done one time per 4 years based on either the CPI or the total combined increases to the metropolitan employees, where the mayor doesn't get all these big raises and the employees are sitting out there on their own. Either it be tied with the raises as a whole and it not take effect till the next term like the other members of council, or either CPI or the same that you do to the other employees, whatever that may be. But I do not believe the sitting mayor, he knew the price when he took the job. He's an elected official. He should wait till the next term before it takes effect.
We'll look at that, Mike. Thank you for that point.
Another question I have, and this is a good one. What is a metropolitan official? Is it the guy that's officially driving that truck? Is it an elected officer? Is it a department head? What is a metropolitan official?
In relation to what?
In relation to nepotism. Well, it's not just nepotism, but I guess it goes back up to 1204 about a government official employed by a firm. There's a lot of people that serve on boards. Maybe they're an official, maybe they're not an official, but if we start eliminating every person that may have any finger touched to government, we've eliminated a lot of diversity and a lot of possibilities for our metropolitan government. We're forcing us to do business out of our county.
So you would prefer that we take out the word metropolitan government official on
I would prefer
1206.
that you just say that the person doing business can't vote on items related to the business he participates in.
Okay.
Because there was a gentleman years ago that was elected to city council, had a hardware store, says the worst thing he ever done, because then he couldn't have any more business, and he cut his own throat being elected trying to do good for the community. This is the same type of scenario, that just because you happen to be a business person thriving, you should not be prohibited from your company doing business with the government, as long as you do not personally participate in the votes or have undue influence on that decision.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. This gentleman here in the front, next to Patsy.
Thank you. I'm Larry Chun. I have several general comments and only 5 questions.
Okay.
Some of these, most all of these that I'm going to ask relates to the utilities. I would like to comment on section 301. And I'm looking at numbers 1, 3, 8, 12, and 13. You mentioned them earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Does section 1 or number 1, does it mean the power, broadband, water, and sewage? Does it authorize, does the mayor have to authorize accounts for utilities or the accounting services that they use? Will the utilities report to the mayor? Will the mayor have to authorize water line extensions, or will the mayor assistant do that? There are capital improvements if it's going to fall under the mayorship. And I'm not looking for a response on all of these. I just want to make some general comments.
Well,
please.
we will look at those, because that's an excellent question. And, but please go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. If all these hold true, why have a utility board, period? Section 4.05 indicates, and you mentioned it earlier, Mr. Ginter, indicates that Maury County Water will be consolidated within 3 years. That's the way it's written.
Mm-hmm.
But you only suggested it may. I would request this commission to change the word will to may.
Okay.
There are several things in this section that are not addressed. It does not address how this would be accomplished. It does not address who will appoint board members, or how long, or the length of term. Under the existing law of CPWS, they can only have 5 board members. How will rural residents have access and representation on a board with only 5 members? Shouldn't the charter provide some sort, or members of the Maury County Board of Public Utilities to be members of this board? It does not address the rate structure. Will the customers of MCWS be charged the same rate as the city water customers, since they will be within the boundaries of the Metro government? And should a provision be included in the charter to cover that? Will any cost savings with the consolidation of the 2 systems be passed on to the rural customers of Maury County water system? Rural water reserves were paid by the users of the rural water system to meet operation.
Doug, why don't you give me yours? You probably wore that one out.
Can I wear this one out?
Okay.
Okay. It does not address the rate structure, and I would ask that will the customers, I'm not going to repeat that, will sewer service be extended to the Maury County water customers if consolidation of utilities is a good idea under new Metropolitan Government? Shouldn't the city sewer system become part of CPWS, especially since the sewer fund has lost money over the last couple of years? It does not address who will set urban service district rates. And I ask, will it be the 3-member urban council members? Article 6 relates to the finance, the budget of urban services. It does not mention the water rates. Section 7.04 relates to the director of finance for general services. Will they set the rate structure for the general service areas where we supply water?
Okay.
Will there be bookkeeping system for urban services and general services in the water supply? CPWS has no desire in our 33-year history. It still has no desire today to serve rural residents of Maury County. That's why we have 2 water systems. Mr. Ginter, I can remember in 1977, 5, 6, and 7, Columbia would not serve rural residents, and that's the reason we were formed.
Okay.
That was before you came here. In the metro, if the Metropolitan Charter consolidates the two water systems, it will most likely stop any hope to expand rural service in the rural area under CPS's current structure. Both systems have very strong commitments to serve the public's need and concerns. Both have special needs to meet the different in geographical areas that we serve. I asked, would fire hydrants be required under the Metro Charter? The city has a fire rating of 3 with funds coming from tax dollars and help from Columbia Fire Department for maintenance to help support it. Rural water system has no help to offset any of the cost of hydrants, and the burden belongs to the system personnel and water users to pay for it and take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
If fire hydrants are a requirement under Metro Council, it'll cost millions on top of millions. With larger water lines, the fire flow of quality of water will be unacceptable in the rural areas.
Okay.
If it goes to urban areas, you're talking about special districts, if they require fire flows, are you gonna put that on the tax base of them?
Okay.
Rural residents will lose their representation because rural water lines will not be extended, and you look at the history who's run rural water service, and Columbia does run some rural water lines out back in the early 70s. If these systems are combined, it puts this county rural area residents back to about the mid-1970s when CWS would not extend water to rural service to give people drinking water. That's all they were asking for. Article 907 prohibits the transfer of funds appropriated to the school system for any other use. A similar provision should be made for funds of Maury County water system to be made sure that they are used for the benefit of the customer base and not Columbia Power and Water System water customers. Article 9 detailed provision for the school board and the budget. Section 4.05 does not define the utilities, how the boards will be set and how they'll operate. My second question, I would ask why so little attention has been given to the Board of Public Utilities, both Columbia and Maury County. This section leaves out many answers to questions that are designed by various Tennessee codes annotated. And I wonder, can any of the voters read this document and make a sound judgment and vote for it with so many unknowns about some of the very important issues that serve Maury County, both broadband, power, and water and sewage? My fourth question would be, what's the Metro government startup going to cost the taxpayer? And my fifth question, what will be the cost savings if the taxpayer adopted a new government? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Since you've done a good job of reading that, could Stephen get a copy of that who's directly 2 rows behind you, or did you get it all, Stephen?
No, I'm sure I didn't get all of it. I tried.
What we'd like to do, and I appreciate you taking the time that you have, because I think, you know, that's basically what I said to Jim Clark. You know, we stayed out of that area for a number of the same reasons you've raised. But now that you have raised those, I think it's important for us to take a look at it, and hopefully Jim and his board will also give us something so that we can begin to take a look at that process. But I appreciate those comments very much.
Thank you. My name is Judy Vick, and I am on the County Commission. And I want to thank Mr. Chun. He certainly addressed a lot of my concerns as well regarding the simplicity of the document and how that may be detrimental to the Maury County citizens. I have a few things, and I have mentioned these at several meetings, but there are some new folks here, so I want to raise question again. There is concern about a 6-year term. The newly elected officials would serve 3 months shy of 6 years. Neither the president or the governor serves for more than 4. I have real strong concerns about that. I would like to see that, and if you see in section 2.02, when it talks about the council members and compensation, I really would like for us to clearly state the dollar amount that those folks would be compensated. it concerns me that they would have only 2 meetings a month. I understand that there could be some special call meetings, but if I read this correctly and I know how the state pays and what the guidelines are, we could be talking $8,000 to $10,000 a year for these folks to have 2 meetings a month. Now, I'd like to see some dollar amounts in there so that the public truly knows what they're looking at. I also, at the first meeting that we had, I know there were some folks here that were a big part of getting Metro Charter, and it took 2 tries to get 10% of the voters to get the petition. I have a real concern about trying to change that to have any petition that now requires 25%. That looks to me like maybe there's an attempt to make sure we never had enough voters that could get anything changed. I know another concern that I think was raised the last time was part of the initial reason for this was to make sure there was transparency, and it was asked that there be a recall provision put in. That was addressed, and I wanted to make sure that we still have that on the forefront. Also, that there was discussion that if Metro Charter passed and 6 months later the citizens of Maury County were terribly disturbed about what was going on, that there's no provision to dissolve Metro government. Once you have it, folks, you have it. You can make amendments, but you can never do away with it. And there are some other issues, but I'll save that till the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. The comments she's made, we've already documented, and we'll be addressing those at a future meeting. Additional comments? This gentleman here in the front, Mike, will get to you in a second. You've worn that microphone out, Mike.
Is it working now? This will be fairly brief. First is a request for, information. As just a regular voter, not involved in anything business-wise locally, how do I get information about the pros and cons of Metro government? Because this doesn't address pros and cons, as you said it's not supposed to. And I'm having a heck of a time finding why I should vote for a Metro government.
Sure.
Most of my adult life I've lived in counties. Wherever I've lived, I've paid higher homeowners insurance and I've paid because of fire protection. I've not had water or sewer service, and I've not had garbage pickup, and that's by my choice. And I kind of like that. And if Metro's a good idea, why is it a good idea, and how do I find out about it? That's my question.
If you'll give me your email address after our meeting, I'll send you to a couple of websites that might help you on that.
Because my basic opinion is I don't particularly want, I remember when Indianapolis went Metro, I lived outside it, and just a few years later, there were a lot of unhappy people. And that's the thing that sticks in the back of my mind.
Sure.
So the other is just a question. In, I think it's 502, it talks about annexation into the urban services district. How is it determined when some area will be annexed into the urban services district? Is it by petition of the residents, or is it because the within the council decides that we want this area brought into our urban district instead of being in the general district? How does that go
It can
about?
be any of those factors. It can be initiated by the Metro Council, it can be initiated by the voters that are outside of the urban service district. The services that for those that are in the general service district, maybe they don't want all of the services that are in the urban. Maybe they want some. It's whatever those residents would, if they want to be a full-fledged part of the urban service district, then that would be through a petition of the property owners and/or the Metro Council, unless Randy tells me differently.
No, it's the same process as annexation currently. We haven't changed, well, we can't change that process because that's determined by state law, but the annexation of the city of Columbia's limits would be exactly the same process as annexing or increasing the size of the urban services area.
Okay, once one or the other decides they want to become part of the urban services, who makes that? How does that determination made? I've lost that somewhere. Is just the council meets and decides, okay, we're going to bring them in? Or is it by vote of the population? Or I'm outside of any knowledge around this.
It can be initiated by either the people who live there that want to be, or it can be initiated by the council.
I understand that'll initiate it. What finalizes it?
The council.
The council.
Just like right now, the city council. Yeah.
To respond to what you said there, first thing, the parallels to Indianapolis may be valid and may not be, because state law is considerably different about how metropolitan governments are done. All I'm saying is, if you're looking at parallels in other states, be a little bit careful, because the state laws are different, and that makes all the difference in the world. And what was the other?
Annexation.
Yeah, annexation really doesn't, like we said, the process is almost exactly the same according to state law as it is with the city. The only difference is the council that's voting on the annexation is the Metro Council, which is representing the entire county, not just the city. So politically, there is some difference in the power structure there. You've got to convince people whose constituency is the whole county that the Urban Services District needs to expand and take over this area. Whereas with the city government, the political base there is just the people whose constituency is the existing members of the city, or existing citizens of the city. So there's little difference there.
People thought they were getting one thing, and in the end, they didn't get what they thought they were getting. I don't know if it was misrepresented or what it was, but they were very unhappy because this wasn't what we thought we voted for, they said. I didn't live in that area. I lived outside it. But there were a lot of very unhappy people because they felt like they were misrepresented.
Well, if I could just make one comment on that. If anybody tells you this thing's going to work miracles, don't believe it. On the other hand, I'd say if anybody tells you it's going to be a total disaster, you probably don't need to believe that either. It's somewhere in between, and I'm not going to tell you whether it's good or bad. The voters will have to figure that out.
I have yet to be presented any advantages that I understand, and that's all.
I think the annexation question raises a point with me. It talks in section 204 about regular and special meetings, and I presume it talks about regular meeting. I presume the regular meetings will also be open for public comment, but
yes.
It doesn't really say that anywhere.
Well, we'll make sure that there's some terminology in there that says that it's open for public input. Good point. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, two things, and I'm going to try to be quiet. Urban Council. To me, I understand the requirements for the ability to levy the tax. It has to go through the municipal corporation type setup with an urban council. However, why 3 members? It seems like that plays into a political ploy for somebody to say, you voted for it. The public doesn't care. They don't know that you didn't have any choice but to vote for it. Why can it not be every member that districts touches or resides within the urban services?
That one I can answer.
Okay.
The state metropolitan statute that says, here's how you create a metropolitan government. It says you have to have an urban council, and it has 3 members. Which has absolutely no authority. And my question to the state, to our legislative council was, then why are we doing this? If it has 0 authority, 0 effect, and there's a long answer, but you have to, but that's it, they have no authority.
And it's statutorily
But that's
3 members.
that's one of the requirements of creating a charter. We have to follow the statute on how to create a metropolitan charter as decided by Tennessee Code. You know, and there's a lot of discretion, there's a lot of mandatory things, but that urban council, which I severely dislike because it's meaningless, is a requirement.
Okay.
Or I would have just chucked it.
All right, that explains that to me. I guess the other thing, and it hasn't been addressed anywhere in here, but a lot of the public doesn't understand there are many portions of government that are operated as a separate independent business model, like enterprise fund situations, utilities, and things of that nature. That has not been addressed here in any way other than, I guess it would be included in the urban services district. However, some utilities do not go by political boundaries. They go by geographic and other constraints. And to me, I think at some point there will have to be an addressing of utilities and other type agencies that operate independent of tax revenue and operate totally on charges and fees.
Well, and Mike, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, and Tim and others, my understanding of what we tried to do was not to disturb the existing independent autonomous agencies that were fee-based and functioning, such as Columbia Power and Water, such as Maury Regional Hospital. You know, and it's the language they used was that those independent agencies would be continued and would continue to operate the way they always have, except now as a political subdivision of the metropolitan government. We really didn't intend to change any of those. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
Well, wastewater is currently part of the City of Columbia. It's not an autonomous, independent agency.
Correct. However, it is independently funded and operated, as is your sanitation district.
But it's
just something that will have to be crossed.
It's a line that we didn't draw, we perpetuated. That the wastewater is part of the City of Columbia, and Columbia Power and Water's
part of the City of
Columbia. It is, but it's an independent, autonomous agency set up under the state law for utility boards. And so there's a big difference between wastewater, or the sewer system, and Columbia Power and Water.
All right. I'm concerned.
Yeah,
I'm not far from retirement, so it ain't gonna make any difference to me, but I am concerned.
Yeah, I mean, and there's I've read a lot and heard a lot. You know, do you put the sewer? Do you leave it part of the metro, like it was part of the city? Because it is a fee generating department. Do you move it out into an independent wastewater department all of its own, or do you move it under an existing board that you've already created, Columbia Power and Water? You know, there was a limit to how many trees we could kill and problems we could solve, and trying to draft a basic charter that created a metropolitan government that would function and appease as many people as we could. Again, remembering that the principle here is it's going to be voted on. So if it's going to be voted on and it has the democratic chance of being our government, we want to try to do as good a job as we possibly can. And that's why we're here. That's why we're talking, to change it, to write it in as good a way as we can in case it passes. Because if it passes, it's it. That's where we're going.
Yes, I understand. Then there's no backing up once it passes. For all my criticisms and comments, as a whole, I think it is a decent document. I think it is simple and good to read, except for 2 words. One of them you've already addressed. I kind of disagree, but if legal minds are better than mine. And the other one, grave. Very hard word to put, just like official. It's very hard to define. But grave misconduct and that word, neglect of duty. And neglect of duty, to me, says it. But those two words are the only things that the rest of it make,
Well,
even though I may
appreciate it.
disagree, it makes sense.
Thank you. Patsy? Oh, I'm sorry.
I've got a question about this whole process. You said that there was a petition, showed up, said that, and legally, you guys had to do all this.
Correct.
All right. And you said you spent 9 months doing all this.
Correct.
And most of the people that I've talked to don't want any part of this mess. I've yet to see one pro person say, yeah, this is good. Wouldn't have made more sense to, it's okay, the petition shows up, we put it out to the voters. It says, okay, this petition showed up, we want you guys, want the people, the voters, to decide, yes, we want to go through this program, or wad it and put it into the trash. Rather than spend all this time, money, learned people, why didn't they go that way about it?
Well, as I said to you earlier, governments, for the most part, are the creature of the state. And whatever the state says in their annotated codes are what governments have to follow. And in the case of a metropolitan form of government process, it's fairly well laid out of the steps that you have to do. And the two mayors are complying with that requirement. The Board of Elections is complying with that. And I think the 15 of us that are volunteering to do this have certainly tried to follow the spirit of what is required under the state statutes. And as Randy has said to you earlier, on March 6th, you can vote yes or you can vote no. To me, I think it's been a good process. Does it mean that we ought to? Not necessarily. But I think it's important that we periodically challenge ourselves on the form of government. We've already done that here in the city of Columbia. Before I came here as a city manager in 1988, back in the 70s, it was a commission form of government. And so I think it's very healthy for us to periodically look at that. Now, would the city or the county independently do that? Probably not. But apparently there was enough folks who signed that petition that said, we need to look at it. That's who all of us, well, that's who the elected people look to, are the voters. And in this case, over 3,300 people signed that petition. Now, did all 3,300 understand what they signed? No. But this, the Board of Elections certified that that petition met the requirements under 7-1-101, and we're off to the races.
So basically, once the process is started, there are no breaks?
Nope. There probably are.
You know, the one thing too, I discovered this from the beginning until now, the ballot's real simple. Do you want metropolitan government? Yes, no. But the thing is, a metropolitan, yeah, but I think that's what we have discovered. The vote is not that simple. You can't just throw it out and say, do you want metropolitan government? Yes or no. Because a metropolitan government can take 1,000 different directions depending on what's in the charter. It can be structured many ways. As Bill mentioned, we've got 3 different forms of city governments in Maury County right now. We have a mayor and board of aldermen in Spring Hill. We have a commission in Mount Pleasant and a city council in Columbia. And we've tried all types of things. This charter could be one of 31 different flavors. So until you have a charter that has chosen which one of those directions that that our version of metropolitan government would be, you can't vote that yes or no because you don't know. You can't say, I want metropolitan government, because you may hate the charter. Or you may say no. You don't know until you see the charter. And I can assure you, this that we've come up with, and so much of it has come from our meetings with people and city officials and trying to find out what us people in Maury County would like to see. What our version of metropolitan government would look like is very different from, say, the one Coffee County turned down, Moore County turned down, Trousdale passed. They're all very different. And so you can't really say, do I want metropolitan government? Yes, no. Well, it depends. What's your version look like? And I think that's why you have to go through this process. And to a limited extent we did, but it's a petition, not a referendum, and that state law says.
Maybe it needs to be a referendum to start the process. At that point in time, you've got people that say.
You could make that argument. We have a referendum on the back end once the work's been done.
I understand that, but that's cart before the horse. Close the door, so stuff like that.
Yeah, I would have thought so too until I got into this and realized how many different forms this charter can take. So you can't really say in advance, do you want one or not? I realized very quickly, I didn't know. And as we went through it, I went back and forth as we debated, and there were some things that some people wanted in, and I said, well, if that's in there, I'm not for metropolitan government. If that's, we did that and could have easily ended up with a charter, that I would have voted yes for or no for. It depends what was in it. And it was a learning process. I didn't anticipate that when we first started too. I thought, well, it was an easy question. Either we're for it or we're against it. And then, my God, we're going to spend 9 months. But it depends. And a lawyer's favorite word. It depends, but it does.
Yes.
Right, 1st of January?
Yeah, January the 8th, the paper will distribute it in hard copy form. Patsy had a question, I'm sorry, somebody else up there?
Just had one comment. The Metro Council does have the authority and the power, if they chose, with all the issues that have been brought forward, to move the vote to the presidential election and not in the primary, and take time to work on that. You all do have the ability to do that. And with all the questions that have been brought forth to you, I would...
We don't.
I believe you do. I would just ask you then to verify that.
We can ask city and council to extend the date that we turn it in. Once we turn it in, then 100 days later there has to be an election.
But you haven't turned it in yet, and you could ask for an extension.
Well, and that's why we asked for the extension. Todd Baxter, we met with him, and he wanted us to ask for an extension so that the 100-day calendar would fall on a public election, so we didn't want to have a private election and pay for it, where you got one issue. That was the only reason we asked for that extension, so that we could stick it on the very next election where there was going to be stuff on it.
Well, I guess my concern is then, or my question to you is, why not check with Todd Baxter at the Election Commission and see if you could work on this, since the document definitely needs some addressing issues that were brought forth in the last 2 meetings, and put it off to the presidential election. That's just a thought.
It is. I think it's possible.
To take you back to Columbia Power and Water System.
Which we tried to not disturb in this charter. Thank you very much.
However.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. They do have a board.
Yes.
A utility board, as does Maury County Water System.
As
And
does Murray
we-
Regional Hospital, and
That's Murray Regional, and we are also self-sufficient in our funds. We do not go to the county. We have our own budget, and we have our 5 members that make our decisions for us. So I would like for you to keep that in mind.
same thing with 911. I had that question. See, they have their own board, and we did not intend, and I don't think that we did, disturb any of those. We left them operating independently under the metropolitan government, the same way that they existed under the city or county government.
But we made an exception in the Murray County water system, and I would like to suggest that it remain independent.
Okay.
You're right, there was an exception made, or at least allowing the option for those to be merged if the powers that be deemed it in their best interest, and we had a lot of debate about that. And that's why your input has been very valuable, because we really wanted to visit that again.
I want to thank all of you because I know you have put a lot of time into this. I know it's been a learning curve for everyone, and everyone is concerned for the city of Columbia and Maury County, and for that, I do thank you as a
Thank you.
taxpayer. But then again, you did put in this, that Maury County water system would go under Columbia Power and Water
It's a
System.
group of 15.
And the only thing I don't understand is why no one stopped at our door and said, could you tell us a little something about Maury County Water System as we sit here?
Let me express it from my standpoint. The way I thought what we had drafted was, we're not going to require that they be put together. Just look at it, and if it makes the most sense, then do it, and if it doesn't, don't. That's my reading and my interpretation, and that was our conversation, that, us not in the utility business could easily sit back, and this was the conversation we had, and say, well, it might make sense to, instead of 2 water companies, have one. As with many other agencies, but I think there was enough in our group that knew more about it than I did, that said, that might not work as easily as it sounds, on paper. So let's put in this period of time whereby we'll study it, and if it would work and is in our best interest, then do it. But if not, then don't. So kind of the way I looked at it is where we're consolidating a lot of departments and boards. What we did with this one was say, well, don't consolidate it just yet. Let's wait and look at this one for 3 years. Now that was my perception, that while many departments could be consolidated and should be consolidated and would be consolidated, we said, wait on this, because I'm not sure how this would work, and I think some study needs to be done, because it's...
And that's all we asked, that there just be some study.
And that was the conversation we had, and again, we none of us are really that knowledgeable, but...
Mr. Hardison,
Yeah.
earlier, did I understand you to say Urban Service District had no power as far as the 3-member urban council?
That is correct.
Well, I read this as their sole function is a mandatory obligation to levy ad valorem tax.
Mandatory obligation. They have to do, it is mandatory, they have to do what the Metropolitan Council tells them. And therefore, that's why I said they have no power.
But they have no power.
It's mandatory. They are obligated to exact the tax that the Metropolitan Council, through their budget, provides, which begs the question, then why do you even have one? But
Thank you. Mr. Gittner, I believe you did say that you would change the word will to may for us. I appreciate that. I would say Mike Anderson, in his ultimate wisdom with sewage, has had a long, hard battle with his rate structures. Columbia Power has had a long, hard battle with their rate structures. Maury County has had one also. But if we have adequate funding, we'll all still be independent. It won't cost the taxpayers nothing.
Okay. Thank you, sir. One more question, we'll end it for this evening. Anybody who wants to take up the last question?
Question.
Yes, sir.
Everything that's been talked about tonight, you say that you're taking notes. Are you going to have it in the form in the next meeting? Or is this what we've got right now, is that going to be the same thing as what we get next time?
And Bill and I haven't talked about this. We haven't met as a group of 15 since the first meeting to be able to go over these things. And I assume, Bill, our thinking was, let's instead of having a public meeting, then meeting, having a public, we're going to gather up everything and then have 1 or 2 more meetings.
Yeah.
That's,
You're going to have more meetings in January, or?
No.
no, this month.
We're
Yeah.
talking about the,
But I'm asking, we're bringing up all these points. When are these points going to be incorporated into the charter? Or are they just going to be set aside and you discuss it?
When's the next
Put in
public
what you want
forum?
the
The 14th?
November the 14th.
When do we meet again?
I was going to have us meet
I don't
on-
know. It's the reason I'm asking the question.
I was going to have us
point.
meet on the 10th to address the comments that came up on the first public forum in this forum. And depending on what we get on the third forum, we'll deal with that on the 17th.
So we could answer some of those questions at
Yes.
that last hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when is it going to be incorporated or not incorporated into the charter?
Well, the December 1st is the date that we're going to finalize our work in order to meet the time schedule that the Charter Commission is under. And we will present that charter to the 3 cities, the Board of Elections, and the county on December 8th. And at that point, our work is completed based on everything that we've looked at.
John, Bill, if we meet on the 10th, we're going to consider all these things, and we're going to vote, and some yes, some no, and whatever yes will go into the charter. Will we have a revised charter before that last public hearing, which I guess is what you're asking? Have one to see?
Well, we would certainly have I would need to talk to Katie, but we would certainly have the comments from our first and second forum in there, I would hope. Now, whether we can produce that document by the evening of the 14th, that's only 4 days, I'm not sure it'll all be in there.
I think we ought to be able to answer some of the questions, yeah. Well, we'll talk about it.
Well, again, I want to say on behalf of the Commission, thank you for your time and effort. It's been very informative to us.
Yes, it
and
has.
we truly appreciate you coming out on an evening like tonight. And we will meet again here in this same building on November the 10th.
14th.
14th, excuse me, the 14th. Thank you, sir. And